You open your new tool. You've got your new process up on your second monitor. You've got your 8 pages of handwritten notes from that one training session you had last week. You are ready. You take a deep breath and you log in. But instead of the dashboard you were expecting, you're presented with an exam that you haven't studied for. Also, everyone in the room is pointing and laughing at you. Also, you're naked. For a lot of folks, big changes to tools and workflows is their worst nightmare. It's one of the biggest barriers to adoption, and as a result, it's one of the biggest barriers to positive, productive impact. So what's to be done? In an age of tool overwhelm, change fatigue, and AI-related anxiety, how can you give your new tool or process the best chance of being embraced by the very folks whose lives it was meant to improve? That's exactly what we're going to dive into today. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. My name is Galen Low with the Digital Project Manager. We are a community of digital professionals on a mission to help each other get skilled, get confident, and get connected so that we can amplify the value of project management in a digital world. If you want to hear more about that, head on over to thedpm.com/membership. And if you're into future-looking conversations and practical insights around digital project leadership, consider subscribing to the show for weekly episodes. Okay, today we are talking about the challenges of rolling out new tools and new processes in an age of tool fatigue, change fatigue, AI fatigue, and quite possibly just general physical fatigue. Like, how can you get your teams on side with tools and processes that will ultimately help them when they're already mistrustful of technology, already doubtful of their job security, already feeling pressured to do more, and already fed up with the accelerating pace of disruptions to their professional lives? That was a lot. With me today is Frances Odera Matthews, certified Notion consultant, process designer, culture builder, speaker, storyteller, founder of the Notion Bar, and host of Coffee and Oysters, the podcast for and by London's business babes. Whew, those creds are a lot. Frances, thank you for being here with me today. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah, super excited to be here. I have a lot of thoughts on today. I have a lot of thoughts.
I sense that. I know that we had a great conversation in the green room. This is something that, you were on the show, gosh, it's probably a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
Time has been flying by, but you've been keeping busy. And in terms of what you do, tool implementation, process implementation, it's just such a hot button right now because everyone's kind of in the midst of some kind of change, some kind of transformation, some kind of optimization. They're looking at tools, they're looking at processes for ways to scale, to grow, to streamline, all those things. But maybe let me just zoom out. So for folks listening, depending on when you're listening, at time of recording, it's 2025. And not only are there hundreds of tools on the market to help you lead your projects and run your business, but there's also reams of new AI tools to help you work faster, smarter, and frankly, beyond your natural capabilities. And not only that, but that also means that our processes are changing more frequently and more drastically than ever before. And yet, so many initiatives to implement new tools and new processes still fail at the adoption stage, which ultimately stunts organizational transformation. It removes businesses' competitive edge. It does the exact opposite of what these initiatives were actually, or what these tools and processes were initially meant to do. So I thought maybe I'd just start with the hot question, which is, do tools and processes fail because humans kind of suck at change management? Or is it that we just expect too much from our tools and processes? Or maybe is it just that we're all tired?
So it's a combination of all of it, really. So ultimately, humans don't like change. Evolutionary, we like things that we know, we like things that keep us safe. And so that's an issue. And so if you want to do any kind of change, you need to make it as easy and seen as beneficial as humanly possible, which a lot of the time just isn't what ends up happening. And then the other side of it is that a tool is not a magic wand. A tool isn't going to change the culture. A tool isn't going to change how chaotic you are as an organization. That comes from real in-depth culture change and a look at your values and a look of what, even just getting a grasp of what your processes are. Is this new thing that you're adding moving the needle for you legitimately? Or like, is it actually causing more work than you need? And you're just doing it so you can sound cool in front of your other agency owners and be like, oh, well, we're using this tool now. And I'm like, okay, that's nice, cool. Like, we're tracking this KPI. And like, okay, nice. Like, who cares?
Which are real conversations that happen between agency folks, by the way.
Literally. And then, so there's that, just kind of wanting to jump on the hype train so you can seem cool. And then like people are trying to do things too quickly and they want everything now. But that's not how our brains work because we're too tired. We can't do everything now. Like, so my whole tagline with my Notion consultancy is creating cultures of intention. And I really recognize that Notion is such an incredible tool. It's so powerful. It's so flexible. But just because you can do everything with Notion doesn't mean that you should. And so I'm only going to build things that like move the needle for you specifically. And a lot of the time clients come to me because they've downloaded this crazy template, which is super overcomplicated and they're just overwhelmed by it. And so I have to be like a psychologist and be like, well, what do you actually need? What matters to you? And let's start there, which is pretty much what you should do with not just Notion, but like any tool, really.
I really like that it starts with that silver bullet that they picked up along the way. And they're like, I'm confused, Frances, can you help? And you're like, actually, there's no silver bullet. But the other thing I really like about it is this like hurriedness, right? This rush, right? This sort of like wanting it to be instant or fast. And a colleague of mine just posted today about eating a whole bag of chips. You know, you open a bag of chips, you're like, may as well finish it. I mean, it's open, but it's probably not a good idea. And sometimes like what you're saying in terms of like, you know, when people think new tool, new process, we kind of think, okay, yeah, we'll just buy a new tool. We'll just set it up. We'll just create some new processes. And then like 7 days later, everything's going to be perfect. But what you just described to me is like, yeah, maybe don't assume that you're going to eat this whole bag of chips in one go. Maybe let's like take our time with it. And I guess, how do you deal with that sort of like impatience, like this sort of hype and pressure to like find this magic bullet? And then you're like, actually, it's going to take a long time. And I'm imagining that a lot of folks are like, whoa, I haven't got that much time.
Yeah, so I've actually forced my clients into this now by how I've shaped my packages. So I've, instead of just like offering like massive build outs, I now offer a 5-day workspace program, which is a condensed amount of time of like 25 hours, 5 hours per day, where I'm like, we are going to prioritize. So you've got a list of like 100 things. Sure, tell them to me. But like, we're going to prioritize from that list what we can reasonably fit into this chunk of like build out of 5 days. And more often than not, the amount that we can fit into that amount of time is the things that actually matter to them. And I'm like, okay, let you go off, digest this bit. Once you're comfortable with it, then we'll do another 5 days. And so I kind of deal with people not eating the whole bag of chips by literally putting it into bowls for them.
Yeah, you get one chip. Which of these one chips do you want to do in the 5 days?
Exactly.
I mean, you know, arguably humans are better at small change. I mean, we're not good at any change. You're absolutely right. But like they're better at small bite-sized change than like broad sort of destabilizing change. I like that it kind of becomes like, I don't know, iterative, incremental, right? Like it's like sprints, Notion sprints.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not just Notion again. That should be how you should approach any tool. Edge yourself into it and start with them.
Isn't that just the thing too, right? You mentioned like, yeah, Notion is a very versatile tool. Loads of tools are very versatile tools in terms of like, they do a lot of things. It's easy to get that overwhelm, to be like, oh, I'm meant to sort of like imprint this over top of like just overlay it over top of my entire business or all my projects. And like, it's overwhelming of like what to decide to use it for even. So even that notion of prioritizing where there's pain and need, and like also just like, we're just going to focus on this like one bit of the capability to solve a problem, not try and overhaul everything at once, because yeah, a lot of these tools do everything practically, you know, short of mowing your lawn. Like there's a lot of productivity tools, collaboration tools, project management tools. They just, you know, they do everything under the sun because they're trying to stay competitive and useful, but you don't have to use all the features.
Mm-hmm. Exactly that.
I wondered if I could like zoom out a little bit even further, because at the Notion bar, as we've been talking about, you're helping organizations implement the right tools, design the right processes. I'm imagining now that a lot of companies are sort of seeking out that like AI advantage, or at least like trying not to get left in the dust. So I imagine you're talking to a lot of people right now. I think we've been talking about it a little bit, but I'm just wondering what some of the biggest obstacles, or maybe that one big obstacle or challenge that you see organizations running into these days that keeps them from getting their people on board with new tools and processes. And also, like, what are some of the consequences that you're seeing from that, from the front lines?
I would say, again, a tool isn't a magic wand, and they don't actually know what their processes are. They're just like, we're just going to get this new thing. There's no like thought or time being put into like why they need this tool, how they're going to roll out this tool. They try to do everything at once. And most importantly, there's not any training. There's not actually any time put aside to like train people on how to use the thing. And not just the one-off training, you need consistent training. You need consistent sessions where people can drop in and essentially ask questions, whether it's from a designated champion on your team, maybe you have a champion per department, or in like monthly team-wide sessions. And that's kind of what I offer as well in my lineup. But people don't value training. They just expect people to know how to use things, but that's just not realistic.
Yeah. And especially like, I think folks listening as well can probably relate. You get that one-time training. It's like part of a scope of some kind of engagement. They're like, cool, you get your like 1 day of training and you drink from the fire hose, like for 8 hours straight. And then the next day you kind of forget it all. And then the rest of it's kind of like help center, right? It's like, well, then just search it in the knowledge base. And like, I'm not that kind of person. I'm like please show me that thing that I have a question about now or like this week versus like, oh yeah, I retained everything from that one training session, or, oh, that's fine. I'll just search until my face goes blue, trying to find the answer for myself. That's the friction for me. It's like, that's the quickest way to lose me on like a tool or a new process. It's like the RTFM and go read the manual. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. That's fine. And that works for some people. But I don't know. I'm someone who would appreciate that sort of like ongoing availability of training from ideally a human to kind of, because it's like, it's the change as well, right? It's not like knowledge transfer. It's my discomfort with change that I want help with. And reading a manual doesn't help me get there. My aha moments are usually when somebody's like, oh, have you seen this thing? I'll be like, oh, yes. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, great. They're like, I didn't see that big blue button there that says do the thing that I want, right? Because it's not because I'm not smart, I hope, but because I'm uncomfortable with the change that's been made in my life to like have to figure this out. Because in the old tool, I would have been done already.
Exactly. Yeah. Or maybe not, because the old tool wasn't good enough. And that's why we need a new tool. But
that's true
in your mind, the discomfort is all you can focus on.
Well, one thing that I love your thoughts on actually was just like this notion that sometimes like process design and tool selection, the gestation period is kind of like it happens over a period of time to decide, yes, we need a new tool or we need to like redevelop this process. Or we got to like bring on some people. We're going to like do these things. Let's plan and like execute, iterate. And like that happens in this like smaller circle. And then like, it's like, cool. All those decisions that we made, they're done now. You can just take the thing that we made and start using it. But actually they've shortchanged the actual time it took them to get on board with the change, because they've got several months of like thinking about it and like kind of planning it and like getting accustomed to the change. And then, on the other end, they think they're doing their people a favor by just being like, you don't even have to think about it. Just like take this glass of water and drink it, as fast as you can. And they're like, wait a minute, why do I have a new glass of water?
Yeah.
Do you find that in some cases, organizations and leaders are actually like well-meaning, but still kind of stuck at change management because of that?
Yeah. I think they haven't invested enough time in like wooing the rest of the team about, or seeming really excited about this new thing that's coming. It's just like, surprise, we're doing this now. I think you've got to breadcrumb people in, get their thoughts and feedback on what they want in the new thing as well. So yeah.
I love that word wooing, because like there is like, sometimes we use the word transparency, but like there is such thing as too much information and also like creating anxiety and fear by like sharing your anxiety and fear along the way. But I do like that word wooing. And I guess it comes back to like that culture thing too, which is, I guess, I mean, is that something that I guess people are thinking, okay, yes, I want to implement a new tool and a new process. And you're like, but culture. Like, what is the first step to kind of identify where there might be just a few like shortcomings in the culture that might be barriers? And like, what are some ways that you've seen some of those rough patches paved over in the culture to kind of start making change in these iterations in like, 5-day chunks?
One thing that I would say is like the concept of being siloed. Do people feel siloed generally? Like, how often does your team touch base with each other? Like, async is great, but I think it's really important to have like human touch points where you feel like you can have real conversations with people and share information openly. So if you don't have a culture of openness, it's really hard to get everyone to start using a new tool, which is supposed to make you be more open. Because they're like, oh, I don't need to share this thing. I don't need to share this thing. You need to like have that offline first.
It's really interesting because like, yeah, a lot of the tools are about sort of collaboration in some ways. We're using these tools together, but if the culture is siloed, then the adoption is also siloed.
Exactly. And then there's also this thing of constant change and moving goalposts, and you're changing direction all the time. So if that is your state of being, there is no point in trying to adopt a tool because everyone's mindset is frantic and changing. There's no stability.
That's really interesting.
Like, there's no point. There's literally no point because you will fall off with this new thing that you're trying to adopt as well.
That blows my mind a bit because I know a lot of organizations these days, in response to the pace of change, have kind of built a culture of continuous change. But what you said at the top, I think rings true, is that like we've, as humans, right, we've evolved to want a bit of both, but like we want to arrive at stability and security. We know we need to change to get there, You might like be, I'm taking this metaphor way too far, but like, you're like, whatever, surviving out in the woods and you're like, this spot isn't safe anymore. I got to like go somewhere else where there's food, less predators. I'm going to have to change, but I'm going to land somewhere stable. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes the cultures that I've been seeing in some organizations that are admirably rapid in terms of like getting stuff done, but they never land. They just kind of been like circling the airstrip the whole time. And everyone's like, okay, I guess we're not going to land. And therefore, to your point, we don't really adopt anything fully because it's going to change. That's actually, it's a really interesting reason to be resistant to change that I hadn't really thought about.
Yeah. Because if you've never landed, how do you know what the ground feels like?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, what does good look like there? I mean, we're thinking about adoption, thinking about change, thinking about like, someone you've worked with, you don't have to name names, but someone you've worked with where, yeah, they did have some things to fix with their culture. But then once they did, they were able to land the plane and that change sort of stuck and it felt stable and adoption felt good.
Yeah. Oh, I would say it's a client I'm currently working with right now. So they are a fast scaling drink supplement brand in the Middle East. And a few things, like all of my favorite things. They've started at a point where there's not a crazy amount of people in the team. So there aren't too many cooks in the kitchen. And there's not a lot to untangle there, really. They've also identified a champion. So this is a person who works very closely with me, who they've also signed up to my monthly group training. So this is someone who's going to get continuous training on Notion, always know what's going on. And they've got a phased rollout. So they're very much aware of like, we're rolling out this bit first, so this team first, before we get the full team fully onboarded, essentially. And they're very clear on what they want. And they don't want to fill Notion with things that aren't useful to them. They're not tracking like random KPIs for the sake of tracking KPIs or trying to integrate this random AI tool that they saw some other agency owner, like,
shiny object stuff, yeah.
There's no shiny objects. Like, they're very clear on what they want and how things should work. And I'm like, this is great.
How is that feeling on the ground for like the team? I don't know if you're like as close to that, but in terms of folks who are sort of on the receiving end of this change, what has some of the sentiment been?
I wouldn't know that, actually, if we're working our way up to the bit where we're rolling it out to the rest of the team. So, but it would be interesting to hear when that happens.
I really like that approach. I really like the sort of definitely the sort of discipline to avoid shiny object syndrome. I love any kind of localized sort of pilot before rolling out a big change. It just gets everyone comfortable, including ourselves as, change agents. And I really like that. I know it's not going to work for everybody, but that moment of scale, because change has this sort of I don't know, multiplicity in terms of complexity. When you're 7 people, change is not easy, but it's a lot easier than when you're 700 people.
Yes.
I like that sort of moment of recognition of when to make a change before doing a big sort of growth sprint and then, hoping for the best.
Exactly. Exactly. And then it becomes frustrating because in these big companies, there's not as much of a retention rate. And then people leave halfway through the project and then it just gets lost in the ether. And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, I mean, and I think we'll get there eventually too, but and the larger the organization, the more you have rogue tools and rogue processes that have come about because it took a while to get around to improving some of the processes. So they're oh, yeah, I'm using this other tool. I just expense it. And you're yeah. Where does that data go? What is the process? Could you train someone on that? Is this, I mean, in some cases, it's well-intentioned again, right? They're I want to be better at doing my job and stay organized. So I downloaded this thing and that's how my team works. And then it's yeah, again, this sort of not boneyard. I was going to say boneyard, but yes, it's these little fiefdoms of tools and processes. Whereas the biggest impact would be to have, some cohesion.
And ironically, maybe if someone took some time to map things out in the beginning, they wouldn't have needed to hire so many people because things would just be straightforward. I see that happen a lot as well.
Fair. And I mean, from my perspective, AI functionality is something I think Notion jumped on it very early. I'm remembering it was before this, I'm talking pre at least my knowledge of ChatGPT. And it was okay, yeah, we're going to leverage generative AI. And of course, some of it is exactly what you're saying, right? It's well, your operating model might actually be different, right? The way you lead projects might be different if you've got an AI tool in your corner. And maybe you need fewer people or different people or people doing different things. And that's something to plan out ahead. I guess, I mean, I'm going to use this to pivot a little bit because I think you raised a really good point about almost being organizations sort of setting up the frameworks early enough so that people aren't going rogue, so that we're not, scaling unnecessarily. But the one thing I wanted to connect it to was this notion of AI tools and freestanding, all sorts. I'm not I'm not gonna I don't think this is isolated to just a few, but I find that a lot of individuals on their own, they're doing their own adopting of new tools because their friend told them or because they feel pressured to stay up to speed. Maybe their organization hasn't set up any governance or, any policies around what tools can and cannot be used. So then that's becoming it's almost accelerating towards this sort of free-for-all tool and process land. What are just some of the risks, but also maybe what are some of the opportunities posed by having folks kind of bring in their own unofficial tools with no sort of formal or formality, formal structures around it?
I think this again goes back to what is your culture as an organization? Do you have a culture where people are openly sharing information with each other and feel like they're comfortable with bringing in new ideas? Do you have that in the first place? And sometimes shiny new objects are good if they're helpful. Do you have a culture where people feel like they can share and you're willing to listen to them and investigate their idea as a team, at least? And that's the bit that's important, because when people start just doing things on their own, what ends up happening is that a lot of the time they might be duplicating a process that they don't need to duplicate. Then all of a sudden they've doubled their work and wasted their time. And that's time that they could be using from a business perspective to earn money. So And then suddenly you're like, oh, we've got too much work. We need to hire someone else. Well, no, you've just got an inefficient place in your process, essentially. So from a business sense, you're losing money. From a personal level, you're probably someone who feels like you've got too much work. And so you've constantly got to play catch up. And so you burn out and leave. From a business sense, that costs you money because then you now have to go and recruit someone else.
Really interesting as like a symptom, right? It's like people kind of going out and proactively getting their own set of, I'll say rogue, but not in a bad way. Their own set of rogue tools might actually be a symptom of them feeling like they're, under pressure or feeling, unstable in their sort of role and maybe overworked. I think that's really interesting. I also really like that notion of like the culture. It's like such a I know it's arguably a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But the thing that you said there about like the culture of sharing to kind of like make sure we're not reduplicating stuff or that there isn't a better way, which originally should have been the reason for sharing anyways. But sometimes, a sharing culture, sometimes you see like culture of like, not knocking it, but some organizations, they're like, no DMs. Like if you're going to have a chat, have it in a public channel so that everyone can kind of share. And then suddenly everyone's just overwhelmed or flooded with information. Whereas the sort of risk management standpoint is like, cool, if you're like, we encourage you, right? Maybe it's not even a policy, quote unquote, but it's like our culture is like, we want you to experiment with stuff, share what you're learning. Our job is going to be to like identify where there's need and like, where we need to kind of go further and pursue it and make it a bit more formal and where we're like duplicating effort because, we don't really want everyone to sort of find their own tool and solve the same problem when we actually had like 700 other problems to fix. And that's kind of like, it's pragmatic. Do you know what I mean? It's not like gatekeeping. It's not policing. It's just pragmatic business.
Mm-hmm. And I've worked at a lot of agencies and worked with a lot of agencies. And what I've always seen is that the best environments that I've been privy to are those environments that in the same way that you have capacity for client work, you have structured capacity for internal improvement and discussions about processes and giving people time to do things like tidy up files or like discuss new tools or because that's just as important as your billable hours.
I love that. How do you frame the ROI to folks who might be a bit resistant to that idea? Because I've kind of been there as well. Like, I know that there's value in like being organized and doing internal improvements. But, when there's money on the table from client work, I've found, multiple organizations, it's a really hard thing to kind of balance or or say no to.
I mean, if you need a metric to put it up against, like work out what that time is and what that would cost you against your recruitment costs, because people don't like change, but they definitely do not like chaos. They will leave. They will leave.
I like that notion of like, the cost of not doing it actually is something that's pretty easy to at least ballpark. I know I've been talking a little bit like kind of like at a sort of change agent, decision maker, sort of leadership kind of level. But, a lot of the time this change like is delivered or managed by sort of middle management. And I'm just thinking like, in your opinion, what's the best way for folks who are like kind of like stuck in between, like project managers? How can folks in the middle deal with teams that are like resistant to change and like won't adopt a tool, maybe because they just have like tool or change fatigue?
I think you need to be receptive to just everyone's feedback, first of all. And it will be specific to every team, but based on the resistance, you can judge how much you need to phase your rollout by. Like, if there's a ton of resistance by everybody, then you need to like really like baby step people in. But if you have, I don't know, maybe like 70% of people who are like, relatively okay with it, then maybe you have a relatively okay, like slower rollout, but then you identify champions from those 70 people, maybe the top 10%, who kind of hold the hands of the lower 30%, essentially. And so you don't leave them behind, basically. But if everyone's gung ho, then go for it.
I like that notion of like champions at every level. I think a lot of the conversations around change are like, yeah, find your champions. And usually the example is like, yeah, someone from your C-suite should be an advocate of this change, or like someone influential who's like head of department should be, doing X or Y. But I love what you just said about like within your team, and like for my audience, like within your project team, folks that you might not even be the direct manager over top of, if you can find those champions, that also is a strategy that will work for you at this sort of middle layer. And also that, yeah, the value of the feedback. I know it's like, I frame the question as a sort of, yeah, stuck in that don't shoot the messenger sort of role, right? We're like, sorry, leadership says we need to use this new tool and use this new process. And my job is to like deliver the message, but actually it's bi-directional. And like, that's actually one of the most useful things in change management, especially if there's the right culture, to be like, listen, also, can you tell us how it's going, like down there on the ground? Like, we're not there. We're not seeing people. People won't even tell us the truth because, X or Y, that it's like there's hierarchy and there's like pressure and they're worried about their job security. But like, can you be that person who relays feedback to us, in a meaningful way? And or can we empower you to like make some changes or recommendations on how we do this? And the pacing thing is like something that like I think doesn't get talked about enough, right? Which is like, oh, yeah, like 90% of the team is like really upset about this. And instead of trying to force it faster or like just stick to a plan, which, project managers are great at, it's like, listen, there's a risk that this could all fall apart. And then like, all this investment and no one's going to adopt this change. Everyone's going to be unhappy. We're going to see churn. Can we just stretch it out a bit? Can we like change the pacing of this so that we give people more time to ask questions and give feedback, and we can refine these things and just all together, just like get on board and get comfortable with this change. And I think it's a lever that doesn't get pulled enough, frankly, where it's not like, binary. It's like, okay, well, people are upset. Throw out this tool we bought and like just burn all the documentation for the process. That never happens. But also just like slowing the pace. I find like not a lot of folks do that, think of it. And I think it's a really nice way to go about it.
Yeah. That is the most ideal world, although I do recognize that we are unfortunately under the pillars of capitalism. And if the change does need to happen quickly, something quite radical, but does work, is you literally have to get rid of the old tools. You have to not give people a choice, but using the new tool. And in that case, they will be pissed, quite frankly. But what you do to counteract that anger is that you identify your champions, and along every step of the way, you have people hold each other's like hands along the way. But you have to get rid of old tools.
That's really interesting, actually. I didn't think you were going to say that. But you're right. Like, there is sometimes the reality is change needs to happen fast, and adoption needs to happen fast for reasons, external to like your team culture. But there is a right way to do it, and, do it empathetically. I sometimes find myself involved in conversations that are like, it's not exactly what I call change management, more than what I would consider to be a plan to cram this change down people's throats, which is like the far, the other side of the extreme. But like, I like the sort of middle ground where it's like, listen, we need to change fast. We are going to cut off the old tool, we're giving like a brief window, but we can't have people slip back into like the old tool. Maybe there's like licensing costs. Like we did a CRM transition, and like CRMs, like if you can afford to have two at the same time, you're doing great. Most people can't. So there's this transition period, and then we need to like stop using it. And we're all in this together. And we have built a culture of sharing and safety and empathy to know that, yeah, we do need to just push ahead and fast. And it's not going to be comfortable, but that's kind of like recognize that at least and be all in it together.
Exactly. Like High School Musical.
There you go. When in doubt,
exactly.
revisit the High School Musical set of films.
Yeah, exactly.
I would be remiss not to ask the Notion expert, in my opinion, what is the most popular project-related use case for Notion's AI features that your clients are asking you about?
I can tell you what it is right now and what it's about to be, actually, with a new release. So what it is right now is, so you've got all of these SOPs everywhere. across Notion, but maybe across other apps like Google Drive, etc. You can just ask Notion like AI, like, hey, tell me about our vacation policies. And then it will scan everything and it will give you a summary. So that is what people are using Notion AI a lot for, is just to like get high level information that is scattered across different places. But I think the most exciting use of Notion AI is basically, I have access to it because I'm a Notion ambassador / consultant, but they're starting to like phase it out to people, is AI meeting notes. So there will be AI meeting note blocks that you can just like put into any page. It's actually really good. Like the summaries are very, very good. And so I think teams will use that a lot.
That is one of my favorite use cases for AI in general right now. Partly because it's the most mature. Partly is because it's like, AI right now, the generative stuff is good at natural language processing. Guess what note-taking and summarizing is? It's natural language processing. And then I like that it kind of plugs into Notion because like context is king.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there's like lots of note-takers out there. AI note-takers, I mean. But having a sort of separate tool that's going to send you an email that then you need to copy and paste back into Notion is kind of like, I don't know, it's clunky. And I like this idea that there's probably, section, you've got like your page in Notion where you've got all these details and then the context of the meetings that we've had around it. And they're summarized. And then coming back to the original thing about just the power of like an AI-powered search. I'm calling it search. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word. Functionally, we see it as search. It's going to like look at all of the information that it's been training on and bring you back answers from within Notion, but also, if I'm understanding you correctly, from outside of Notion as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so cool. And honestly, we spend so much time, I was going to say alt-tabbing between tools. And then I realized I've been a Mac user for like 20 years. But, we like switch between all these apps and all these tabs in our browser. And coming back to like that ROI of efficiency or like having good internal process or good tools, like some of it is just like time wasted context switching or like finding that tab amongst your 43 tabs and then remembering what it is that you were going to do and not getting distracted by something else. There's an ROI to that kind of efficiency as well, but also there's a comfort to that kind of efficiency.
Yeah.
Like it's less destabilizing to be like, cool, I know where to go and I can just ask a thing and it will sort of bring it back to me and I can carry on with my day. Is almost like the opposite of what I normally think of for like tool adoption. Normally it's like, I'm going to be slower. I'm going to have to figure out how to use it. I'm going to have to like teach it all this stuff and connect all these apps and, all these things. It's going to make me slower. Whereas I like that some of this is like, almost it's pretty quickly going to make you faster.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. For folks who are liking what they're hearing, where can they learn more about you?
So you can find me, if you go to my website, thenotionbar.com, you can find links out to all of the things that I do across social. So I'm most active on LinkedIn at the moment. And then I also have a weekly newsletter, The Notion Zeitgeist, where I drop weekly tips about Notion and new releases, and is also the home of my monthly group coaching academy.
Love that. That sounds like a great way to sort of like keep your finger on the pulse. Things are changing so fast. Yes, it's overwhelming. Yes, change is continuous. It's always happening. But I think, we need people like you to kind of help us make sense of it all.
Yeah, thanks. Just doing what I can. And of course, if you are a London business babe, go listen to Coffee and Oysters.
Yes, Coffee and Oysters. I'm a big fan. I love what you're doing there. It's really important. And yeah, I think you're nailing it there. Just a fanboy a little bit.
Appreciate it. You're a London business babe. Galen.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, honorary.
Honorary.
Awesome. Frances, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been a lot of fun. It's always loads of fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, there you have it. As always, if you'd like to join the conversation with over 1,000 like-minded project management champions, come join our collective. Head on over to thedpm.com/membership to learn more. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and stay in touch on thedigitalprojectmanager.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.